Also, in unrelated news, this is her last speakeasy ever. So let's give her a warm welcome.
Don't get it twisted.
Thank you for that introduction, Cam. I'll just get right into it. This is my newest piece that I wrote for my manuscript that'll be allowing me to graduate, hopefully. And it also falls last, I think, in the order, so maybe it's a little bit special in that regard. It's called King Rat. The sun's just getting up over the front pasture, and I'm already ankle deep in the manure pile, trying to push the busted-up wheelbarrow through the frost-covered, half-decomposed shit. The trick is to build yourself a shit ramp, using the dry stuff on top as sort of a pathway to get to the far side of the pile. Then you can dump and work your way back towards the front, where you'll make another shit ramp, and so on. When it's frost-covered and frozen, though, you've got to do some digging, or sometimes even kicking with a solid steel toe to build that ramp. Then, especially if you're kicking, the other trouble is your socks. In the winter, you've got to wear a good pair of thick wool ones, but they slip. It's gradual at first, but by the time you realize it's happening, the sock's down in a clump at your ankle and you feel the first flake of shit make its way down the wool folds and settle between a toe, or if you're lucky, get stuck at your ankle. I don't mind it though, being a shit kicker. I come from a long line of shit kickers, dairy farmers. The work and the dirt itself are calming, really. There's something about physical labor that's sort of like singing yourself a lullaby. After a while, you carry yourself right out of the shit pile, and all of a sudden you're somewhere else, anywhere. Could be your grandmother's kitchen with ceramic ducks lining the top of the cabinets. Could be the guy you'll see at the laundromat on Wednesday when you sneak a pile of dirty horse blankets in after midnight and he pretends not to notice. Could be the cold chicken you had for dinner last night. But what starts to wear on a person isn't the dirt. It's the infinite pointy noses peering around the corner, perfectly groomed ponytail swishing towards you, the click of polished leather that cut right out of that song, and all of a sudden you notice the flakes of shit in your socks. It's Christmas Eve morning, and by the time the sun's up, every ponytail in the place wants to pet her horse, wants her stall double-bedded. This blonde one, Tamsin. If that isn't a nose in the air kind of name, damn me to hell. Tamsin does this routine in the mornings where she gets there around 9:30 and does a double take when she sees me in one of the stalls. Wow, early bird, she says. Here at 5 every day, 24/7, Christmas and Easter. Then she laughs like I'm joking, even though I say the same damn thing every time she makes an early bird comment. One time I told her she was saying it wrong, that it's actually early bird guts the worm, and she pushed her nose way up in the air and said, well, even if it is, that's not how I'm going to say it. I don't know where I got that, about the bird gutting the worm. Probably from one of those stories my grandmother is always telling me about the farm she grew up on. She's funny like that, my grandmother, because you're never quite sure what's real or not, but damned if that woman can tell a good story. Well, since you're here so early, Tamsin's saying, could you double bed, Frost? It's Christmas Eve. Yeah, I know, I tell her. I think maybe she thinks I spend so much time shoveling shit I don't know about civilized things like Christmas Eve. But nobody's getting extra bedding. I'll be here in the morning, same as always. Any extra I put in, I've just got to take out tomorrow. She sticks her nose further into the stall as far as she can get in without stepping in herself. You know, Christmas Eve is about the animals, she says. I toss a clump of red piss and hay into the wheelbarrow outside the stall she's almost standing in. They get extra grain tonight, I say. They'll be fine on bedding until tomorrow morning. Well, she says, at the very least, could you check Frost's water bucket? Last I'd seen, he'd messed in it. She flips her hair in the opposite direction and starts toward the back of the barn where Frost's stall is. Frost is her ill-mannered doppelganger Arabian. My grandmother says Arabians are about as useful as cardboard soles in your shoes. She always tells me about how when she and her 8 siblings were growing up, they had to walk to school carrying cardboard cutouts at the bottoms of their shoes in their coat pockets in case it rains. Cardboard soles are a hell of a lot cheaper than mending 9 pairs of worn-out shoes, you know, she says. Her father, my great-grandfather, raised dairy cows, and they had 2 plowing horses, white horse and brown horse. When I get to feeling especially kicked around, I drive to my grandmother's house at night after evening feed. She has insomnia, my grandmother, just like I do, so she doesn't mind if I stop by at night, just so long as I holler up the stairs that it's me before I come up. That way she knows if she needs to pull the shotgun out from under her winter sweaters in the back of her closet or not. She says she hasn't locked a door in 72 years and she's not fixing to start now. That's what the Winchester's for. She doesn't hunt or anything, and my grandfather's been long gone before I even got here. Anyway, I was there all last night. Grandma and I fell asleep together on the couch in the living room. She'd fixed me a plate when I got there, but I was too exhausted to touch much of anything. So she told me about the wood stove. She's always telling me about this wood stove her mother had out back between the house and the horse barn. You wouldn't believe the smell, she tells me. You really wouldn't. You walk past that wood stove and boy, you can smell that bread. There's really nothing else like it, the smell of a wood stove. You helped her? I asked, even though I already know the answer. I hear about the wood stove a lot. What would be in charge of was Shep. That's how we helped. You weren't allowed near that stove, nuh-uh. Shep was their dog. I still can't get a straight answer about what kind she was, only that she was probably a shepherd. Yeah, old Shep, she says. You know, she spoke Italian. That right? Oh yeah. She was doing something she wasn't supposed to, like dig around in the beans. She used to like to dig around in the beans. All you had to do was yell, Mama, guarda il cane. That's look at the dog. And old Shep boy, she'd stop dead in her tracks and look up at you with those sorry eyes dogs have. I swear she told me sorry once, told me not to tell my mother. Anyway, we talked about Shep for a while after dinner, and then she fell asleep on the couch. If not for Tamsin's Pantene hair wafting to the last stall, I'd be done by now and could move on to the next thing. That's the thing about barn work, there's always a next thing. I guess for the same reason I told her about the bird gutting thing, to give her a hard time, I step out of the stall and call down the owl toward her. You mean shit, I say. She spins around on her polished leather heel, that ponytail damn near smacking her in the face, and hisses a mousy, excuse me? You mean shit, fresh shit in his water bucket. She sort of gently grunts, if you can call it that, and continues walking away. I hear her mumbling something about being raised in a barn, but I let her go. I was raised in a drafty old farmhouse with ceramic ducks lining the kitchen cabinets. My grandmother tells me there are two kinds of people in this world, rats and Englishmen. If you're not one, you're the other. When I tell her about the water buckets and Tamsin's pretty little ponytail, she tells me about these cardboard tools she used to carry in her pockets. When it rained, boy, we used to swim like rats to the schoolhouse, she says. Those Americani would drive right past us and would have to try and dodge the puddles before they got close enough to splash us. Then by the time we got to the school, they'd be sitting at their desks already, dry as peacocks. They'd watch us walk in, soaked from head to toe, and call us dirty rats. And we were dirty. My last stall of the day is always an old bay mare with one of the worst swaybacks I've ever seen. Brownie's her name. She's retired now because of the swayback and will likely live out the rest of her days carefree as anything. I'm particularly fond of old Brownie, maybe because she doesn't raise hell when I'm picking her stall, but maybe even more so because there's this glint of humor in her eyes when Tamsin pokes her head in to let me know her Arabian nest somewhere. I like to tell my grandma about old Brownie, partly because she reminds her of Brown Horse from growing up, and partly because she was one of the nicer parts of my day. We have this thing, me and Graham, where we don't always like to be talking about bad things that happen to us, so I always try to get in a little story about Brownie. Sometimes I'll tell Graham about how I'm going to buy up her old farm one day. It went to her oldest brother, who sold it to some dope heads who don't know like about owning a farm. And I tell him I'm going to buy it up, then buy up old Brownie, and we'll be halfway to having a brown horse and a white horse of our own. Brownie's been a little off lately. It's cold. She doesn't get turned out in the winter because there's too many ways to break a leg up there in the snow and ice for someone her age. So it's not exactly unusual that Brownie's a little out of it. Probably bored stiff. I can tell she's been cribbing all morning. That's when they get bored and start scraping their teeth against something. Well, I can tell she's been doing it because of the big chunk of wood torn out of the side of her stall. But at least she's breathing. As long as you hear that calm, easy breathing, you know she's going to last the night. My grandma taught me that, how to tell if an animal's going to make it through the next night by the way it's been breathing that day. Said she learned it from her father when old Shep got to be the age where you start paying attention to how she's breathing. Would beg my papa to let Shep sleep in bed with us, she says, but every day he'd tell us, no, you can see her in the morning. And as sure as shooting, she'd be wagging her tongue at us the next morning when we went out to milk the cows. And then there was that one night when he took her off of her chain outside and let her crawl into bed with us. That was how we knew. Then it's the sound of Tamsin's pretty little boots clicking down from frosted solid brownies, and I squish my toes in my socks. I would switch them out myself, she tells me, but the hose doesn't reach. Sometimes her dopey-looking linebacker of a boyfriend comes with her and pretends to clean out frost buckets or to do some common sense stuff. But the last time he was here, he managed to crack both the frost buckets trying to unfreeze them, it said. But what he really meant was bust them off a cement mounting block to try to get the solid half-ton block of ice out of the bucket. I want to ask her where her football star boyfriend is to smash these ones, but I just nod and flick a pile of wet bedding into the wheelbarrow. If it's not one thing, it's another. Graham says if you've got to be a rat, you might as well be king rat. She gets that from a story she tells me when I get to feeling especially lousy, about how one day, after getting splashed with puddle after puddle, my great-uncle, her brother Gino, stood up on top of his desk, water dripping down from the tip of his big Dago nose, and told this boy named Richard Thomas to shove his American accent clear up his ass. Then when my Uncle Gino was on his way out after being kicked out of class, old Richard Thomas had the nerve to call him a rat. Gino, boy, he had that fight in him. Could be mean as anything, Graham says. He whipped around and gave it to Richard, square in the jaw, stood right on top of him with his arms sort of proud on his hips, and said to old Richard, "That's king rat to you." Then I guess he got escorted out of the schoolhouse, and boy did he get whooped good when my father heard about it. I'll get to it, I tell Tamsin when I look up and she's still standing in front of Brownie's stall. She taps her foot against the concrete aisleway. "Well, I hope it won't be too long," she says. I always think about knocking her square in the face when she says stuff like that. Think about the story I could tell my grandmother, how it was just like Uncle Gino, king rat and all that. But the best I ever seem to be able to do is give her a quiet nod and try my best to ignore her shadow creeping into the stall. I said, I hope it won't be too long. Well, it's not on purpose, but she's standing there in front of my wheelbarrow waiting for me to confirm her existence, I guess. And I'm flicking wet, heavy bedding into the wheelbarrow over my shoulder like I do about 1,000 times over and over every morning. And it just so happens that she's standing right where I need to be flinging. So a fork full of Brownie's wood bedding lands square on her chest. The scream startles Brownie, and anyone else might have kicked out, so I'm thankful I'm in her stall, not someone else's. "What a classless thing to do," she yells over a water bucket. "I mean, really, I've lost the last shred of respect." "It wasn't on purpose," I say. "Why would you stand right in front of the wheelbarrow?" Brownie snickers, I swear. She's poking her nose out the window that looks out into the back paddock, and she's snickering. So I start in on it too. Now Tamsin's really screaming, and I check to make sure Brownie's ears aren't pinned like she's going to kick out. She's still leaning out that window, still snickering. Trash. Total and complete trash. I used to think it was a shame seeing you muck stalls for a living, but this, really, I mean, come on. "What's a shame," I say, "are your boots." I nod toward her newly saddle-soaked pair of Ariat riding boots covered in a fresh pile of Brownie shit. Her gaze follows my nod, and she looks up at me like she wants to throw a punch, but I know she, just like me, will never do it. I guess that's one thing we've got in common. She turns and huffs her way down to the wash rack where we bathe the horses. Lucky for her, they've got hot water. This is one of those things I don't tell Graham about. I don't tell her about the laundromat on Wednesdays because she doesn't agree with wrecking washing machines that aren't mine to wreck, and I don't tell her about Tamsin calling me trash. By evening feed, when everyone's long gone on their way to Christmas Eve Mass or some warm fireplace, and everything's back to calm, to peaceful, I'm in a better mood. It's my favorite night to feed because they get extra and they all seem to know something's different. Something about the snowfall, the wind maybe, the way I'm moving. With a slow calmness instead of the sometimes rapid-fire dump, dump, done I sometimes fall into the habit of doing, especially when it's cold like this. So even if I've been slinging shit all day, and even if Tamsin seems to care so much about how I grew up, I'll have a story to tell Graham. I'll tell her about Brownie's good humor, the farm I'm going to buy up. Sometimes she asks me why I stay here, tells me she can help me make it along until I find somewhere else to work, that kind of stuff. But I tell her it's the sudden silence that makes me stay, when the only sounds are the occasional scrape of teeth against a salt lick, or the remnants of chewing left over from extra grain on Christmas Eve. When the warmth of their bodies is enough to heat up the whole place, sometimes it's enough to let you take your gloves off and put your head down. It's the buzz of fluorescent lights. Maybe it's one or two of them is burnt out, so it's not an all-over uniform type of buzz. It's a little louder in your left ear turned one way, your right turned another. It's the smell of freshly laundered blankets, the dirt stuck beneath your fingernails, the quiet of snow falling. But above all that, if you really want to know why I stay, it's their breathing. Calm, quiet, a snort, quiet. You hear that and you know you're going to make it through the night. Thanks.